look around and look and catch the eye of someone you haven't spoken to before, and go and talk to them, sit next to them, and I want you to ask each other, what was the last radical newspaper or rebellious newspaper or rebellious piece of media that you read? Go.
You're right. We'll be rebellious.
No, New Statesman is not quite that. Yeah, so I guess.
New Statesman. It is right. I like it.
Yeah, that's just regard to things. It's quite interesting to see. It's quite big.
It's the last radical newspaper that you read all the way through. Read it all the way through.
It's not a normal.
That's good, no? Because normally the characters are really like New Internationals or something. Have a look at the content, go to the letters page, get there, skip through all the cartoons. The reviews. Any article on the main page, any letter page. Yeah, the reviews are like it's a music
Yes, it's on radical media through history. So we're just going to introduce ourselves first. So do you want to go first?
My name's Alain Kahan. I'm a librarian working from the Working Class Movement Library in Salford. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. Yes? Very good. Well, we do have a website. I've got some promotional literature here. So part of the reason why I'm here is so that to advertise the existence of the library, but also to make the connection between the library and what we're going to talk about today. Because the resource material that we're using here has actually come from the library.
And my name's Tim. I've recently finished a book called Counterpower. That's writing, not reading. Here it is. And I did a lot of the research for that at the Working Class Movement Library. It's an incredible archive of old badges and pamphlets and banners and, did I say banners? And old radical newspapers. So when I was writing this book, the idea was to try and tell a history of campaigning movements from this perspective of the people on the front line of them. And one of the important sources for those was the radical newspapers from the Working Class Movement Library. So today we're going to kind of talk about some of those. I didn't use all of those in this book. So I'm going to be facilitating and Alain's going to be commentating. And perhaps start by talking about... Oh no, actually, just quickly, can I just... Let's ask people what the last piece of radical...
Yeah.
So maybe someone from... Or someone wants to stick up your hand and say what the last piece of radical media was that you read. Yes?
Peace News.
Peace News. Good, yeah. Let's have a ceasefire as well.
Ceasefire.
Who else is sponsoring the conference? Oh, Peace News again.
What's the definition of radical though? That's what I was wondering how you...
That's an interesting question, isn't it?
Let's get into that when we break into groups later. Now, I mean, I wanted to set a frame for the session by talking about one piece of radical rebellious media that I found particularly interesting when I was researching the book. And I think there's a link to the theme of today as well. So we heard this morning about how radical media advertising company had got in touch with the conference and said, that they couldn't use the name. And the suppression of radical ideas through the written word seems to be a theme throughout history. Whenever people have said things that are so challenging to the elite that they might actually be effective, the elite has always fought back. And I just wanted to read a very quick bit from the book, if that's okay, about
the Poor Man's Guardian.
So is it okay if I just read the bit from the book and then you can add any?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a newspaper from 1831 there. So it was an important part of one of the waves of agitation for the vote towards the First Reform Act, which was the first time that the vote was really extended. So a vital part of this stage of this campaign was a burgeoning alternative press. In the early 19th century, a number of radical newspapers were produced, which served both to give an alternative viewpoint to the established media and to advertise the growing number of radical meetings. Bound copies of Poor Man's Advocate, Gorgon, and Voice of the People live on today in archives and libraries, telling the story of the social struggles of the time from an activist's perspective. In order to stifle the circulation of such subversive commentary, the government introduced a tax to put them outside the purchasing power of ordinary working people, and newspapers were supposed to carry a stamp to show that the duty had been paid. One of the newspapers that refused to pay the tax was Poor Man's Guardian. Its first issue declared, "We will try step by step the power of right against might, and we will begin by protecting and upholding this grand bulwark and defence of our rights, this key to all our liberties, the freedom of the press." The Poor Man's Guardian constructed its own stamp, whose logo incorporated the phrase "liberty of the press," and was emblazoned with some timeless words that encapsulate the notion of counterpower, and that those words are "knowledge is power." Despite 740 people coming to trial for selling such unstamped publications, this newspaper reached as many as 20,000 people. After a number of years, their disobedience led to change as the tax was reduced from 4 pence to 1 penny and then was eventually abolished.
In 1855, so it took quite a long time.
Do you want to say something about knowledge is power?
Yes. Yes, knowledge is power is actually a quotation from Francis Bacon, the Elizabethan philosopher and scientist. And I think it lies at the heart of the way in which working people sought to emancipate themselves in the 19th century. It's difficult to imagine a situation that they find themselves in then, from our point of view, because it's so much easier for us to communicate with each other and to be aware of what's going on in different parts of the country. Having said that, I mean, the normal media choose what we get to see and hear, right? But it was even more the case in those days, right? And the thing about what is collectively known as the radical unstamped press was that they were able to let people know what was happening from the point of view of ordinary working people in places right across the British Isles. And it was the first time that people in Stockport, people in Sheffield, people in Glasgow, right, were aware of the fact that there were other people like them with the same political ideas, the same concerns, the same ordinary working class background, right? This was the first time that those people both had a voice and also had an audience, right? And the assumption on the part of the political elite at the time was that politics was something which ordinary working people shouldn't meddle in. They were overreaching themselves by discussing these sort of subjects.
Can I?
Yeah.
But this wasn't the first time that the movement for the votes and the movement for the redistribution of power had produced their own newspapers. This is
the beginning. Yeah.
So this is a cartoon about the London Corresponding Society.
Yeah, the London Corresponding Society was active in the late 18th century. We're talking about the 1790s, leading up to the a massive act of repression by the government of the day in 1794. And like a lot of cartoons at its time, it's inevitably a pejorative representation of ordinary working people. As you can see there, their features are presented as being you know, almost monkey-like, semi-human. But there's some interesting details in the cartoon. First of all, if you look at the top, there are two portraits pinned onto the wall. One says Tom Paine, author of Rights of Man, Age of Reason, Common Sense. And next to him is another fellow radical, Horn Tuck. And so these are the sort of intellectual heroes of this movement, right? And if you look at what is actually taking place, you've got one person leading to a group of other people. And this was a major concern on the part of the political elite, was that, I suppose they would, the expression that they might use is that a little learning is a dangerous thing. This person was educated enough to be able to read out to other people, and these people couldn't read. And the assumption was that the information that they imbibed from this other person, they didn't have the intellectual power to handle that information responsibly. In other words, working people weren't fit to discuss these ideas. They were seen as imbeciles or children or incompetent in some way, right? And what the London Corresponding Society sought to do was to challenge that notion, you know. And all of these ideas inevitably emanated from the French Revolution and the Declaration of Human Rights. And right at the heart of that is this notion that people are born into the world equal with each other. That in essence, one person isn't really any different from another, and that all of the differences between people are man-made, right? And that fundamental idea challenged the hierarchy of power in this country. And these ideas, these democratic ideas, and this lies at the heart of democracy, right? These democratic ideas had been discussed in certain levels of society for quite a long time. There's a person called John Cartwright, who's the sort of grand old man of the reform movement, who'd been writing, who created a political agenda in the 1770s, which wasn't essentially different from what you had at this time in the 1790s, or even into the middle of the 19th century with the Chartists. The ideas have been there for a long, long time, going right back, in fact, at least to the Civil War, with people like the Levellers and the Diggers and so on, Winstanley, Lilburne. So there's this incredible intellectual continuity, a sense of historical perspective in terms of the ideas that people had. They reach back into the past and reclaim these ideas, right? And they realise that all of these people had been thinking the same that they thought, but it legitimised what they were thinking, right? So it gave them the authority.
I think, so something I picked up when I was kind of taking the broader sweep of radical history for this book was just how often radical media would be used in order to get these ideas out. So in the 1790s we've got the Corresponding Societies, one of the first real organised campaign groups for the vote. And they're not only producing this written word but reading it to one another. Now Tom Paine was best known for his books. When he wrote the second half of Rights of Man, which is this arguably the first kind of popular articulation of what we would nowadays understand as human rights. When he wrote the second part of that, which was about economic and social rights, he was charged by the state and he was forced to escape to France for arguing that we should have the vote and that money and property should be fairly distributed and we should have, you know, the basics of economic and social rights. It's happened many times. I just wanted to read another just small section from the book, which is going to frame the next section. So this is actually from another of the of the phases of the campaign for the vote. Many of you will have heard of the Peterloo Massacre, the big wave of agitation which led to many people being killed and crushed underfoot at a demonstration in Manchester. But as Chomsky was saying this morning, that didn't come out of nowhere. There was a big movement towards that. So, self-education groups emerged. Like the corresponding societies before them, their methods were what might today be termed free area. According to a report by an attendee at a meeting of the Stockport Union for the Promotion of Human Happiness, participants would spend the first part of the meeting reading from radical publications of the day, such as Black Dwarf or the Manchester Observer. Yes, believe it or not, the Manchester Observer was once thought of as a radical publication. Anyway, this would be followed by a discussion debating the words they had read. So for the next part of this, because we did promise it would be a participative workshop, well, we'd like you to think yourself into the characters of these beautiful people up here. You can see that you're arranged in horseshoe circles, and we have with us some copies of some of these newspapers through the ages. So we've got Pig's Meat, which was from the first stage of the agitation for the vote in the 1790s, so let's put that one here.
Early 19th century, Thomas Vance.
Do you mean the early 19th century?
Yeah, 1800s.
Okay, yeah. Yes. We've got Moral and Political magazine of the London Corresponding Society. Who wants that one? Do you want that one here? Yeah. We've got another Pig's Meat. Actually, do you want to hand out some of these?
Okay. We've got the British Worker. This was the magazine of the Trade Union Congress at the time of the General Strike.
Got a copy of Votes for Women here. Okay, so if you want to have maybe a large group around here. Now with that, here's another one published by another podcast. See if you can work out what that's about. So
can I just get through?
Yeah, if you want to join this group.
That's perfect with the Daily Worker.
Is able to share, be aware if you're talking too much, like me, and you've got 10 minutes to be like these people and share what you think. Go.
What is it? When is it from? My guess is from June 17.
It's a clue.
What is it? I reckon
resume negotiations for enforces no conditions for resuming preliminary discussion about any aspect it is absolutely not
The child
what will follow were this affair to try that I should appear in the most glorious of all characters. I should demonstrate with all grandeur the idea of which you know me capable, etc., etc., etc. I don't think this is a mistake, so I think this is a genuine thing.
You know what I think is interesting about that? So in the context of what we were saying before, about how we tend to go for the kind of the easy, colourful, short article. But actually, sort of, if we look back at these people who were pilloried as being kind of illiterate and incapable of thinking about it,
Vote in for you.
I'll do it. Where are we? The roads one, are we? I started reading ahead, but excited. We're on the financial South Africa, unchecked by the officials of the colonial. Sydney Buxton, with contemptible evasions of which we, at one time, should have thought were incapable, declares that a non-conformist Liberal government, with the immaculate GOM at its head, is going to leave the Jay Gould of South Africa a free hand to rob and plunder native races for the financial benefit of himself and his fellow marauders, and to do so under the English flag. A Labour Party at the Cape the country is almost too underdeveloped to expect that the Socialist Party is the only means by which to break the power of this unscrupulous adventurer who works as the there is no doubt about the fact that social democracy, determination and sober enthusiasm with which our comrades are sticking to their work. Their surprising success in the municipal elections with Tempest
within the leadership that this was satirical in the sense of it wasn't just one level of reference.
Okay, so who would you have said it was satirising it, Alain, if it was satirising anyone?
Well, I think that it was...
Can everyone hear it if you're...
Yeah, sorry, I'll turn around. I was trying to help the group here by explaining that the whole name of Pig's Meat, which in a sense was it was a response to Edmund Burke, who was a sort of a middle-ranking intellectual of the time, and who was up to a point notorious to the establishment, wrote a thing called Reflections on the French Revolution, which was very critical of what had happened in the French Revolution. And within that, he called the French people the swinish multitude, right? Oh. It was very much an anti-democratic position to take, right? So, in response to that description of the French revolutionary people as the swinish multitude, a lot of people took up the idea of the pig as being the symbol of the common people, of ordinary working people. And I was also explaining to the group there that there's a connection between, a real physical connection between pigs and working people, because a lot of working people actually kept a pig. Even in the cities, they kept pigs in the backyard because the pig was as sort of a hedge against starvation. What they didn't eat, the pig ate, and when they had nothing to eat, they ate the pig. Right? And it was also a connection with, you know, you have to remember that this is sort of 1790s, early 1800s. This is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The people in the cities had a previous existence as a sort of the agricultural poor, right? They got driven off the land by the mechanisation of agriculture, and they ended up in the cities and got shoved into the factories. But they could remember a time when they managed a subsistence living by keeping a pig, by having a little bit of land to cultivate and growing their own stuff. And that was a recurring dream right the way through the 19th century. You know, but this was, in a sense, a revolt against the factory system.
It was published by Thomas Spence,
Thomas Spence
was, to some extent, inspired by Thomas Paine, but also kind of went beyond that. Yeah. And Spence suffered great oppression from the authorities in his own life, including for selling copies of
in prison many times.
Right,
and he was a Geordie. Apparently he spoke with a Geordie bird. So
that's not why he was in prison, okay, jumping forward, we've got a bit of a votes theme going on here, but anyway, it won't stay like that. Who got Pankhurst papers? Although this wasn't actually Pankhurst paper, specifically, although it was certainly sold by Pankhurst. Carry on. Yes, it was this group back here. So, what did this make you think when you were looking at it?
Well, we looked at the cartoon first. We were just sort of working that out, what it was all meaning, and it was just a sort of basic cartoon around. We didn't even have that bit at the end, or we just had everything at the end. So we were just trying to work out what the cartoon meant when we were given this other newspaper, which we read out.
Done her time there, for suffragette activities. What I find personally significant about this is the way in which this suffragette is presented as a dreadnought, likewise workers' dreadnought there, because this is the time when Britain was building up her navy in the run-up to the First World War, right? And they're building lots. There was a great big sort of arms race, particularly between Germany and Britain, and they're building dreadnought battleships. And it's no accident that at the time of the First World War, Emmeline Pankhurst supported the war. And that's one of the splits that took place within the suffragette movement, whilst on the other hand, Sylvia had a very different perspective, because she'd gone much further to the left. And what you have in here is a lot of evidence in the first instance about, this is in the aftermath of the First World War, when, because the Germans had lost the war, there was this, there were these punitive reparations visited upon Germany, and the occupation of large parts of Germany by the French army. And with the benefit of hindsight, it could be argued that that laid the ground for the Second World War, in the sense that that was one of the reasons why the Nazis were able to so effectively take over the political agenda in Germany, was because of those punitive war reparations.
No, I was in that group. It sounded like one of you knew a little bit about the splits that happened within the suffragette movement.
So if you
Did that?
would like to share some of that with us?
Or did I just walk in on a little bit there? Okay, so I thought that you were talking about. So I think that the splits within the suffragette movement are really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose one of the other things to look at is you know, where issues of gender, race, and class, how they meet up with each other, and how, you know, some take precedence over others, you know, and which you think is the most important, and how those, you know, for example, there was a time in the history of the Communist International when the only thing that mattered was your class, and everything else seemed to be irrelevant, right? It didn't matter whether you were male or female, or what your orientation was. That was something they didn't even consider, right? And likewise, you know, whether you're black or white or yellow or anything, that was supposed to be completely beside the point, because we were all communists, right? And you could ignore everything else. And I would suggest that that is a rather simplistic view of things.
But I mean, back to the splits. So there were more than two pro-women's suffrage newspapers.
Yeah.
Votes for Women is probably the most famous one. That was the rallying cry of the suffragette movement. But that didn't mean that it was a united movement. So probably most people in this room are familiar with the divide in tactics between the suffragists and the suffragettes. The suffragists were in favour of essentially using the system and asking nicely, and the suffragettes were in favour of taking direct action, claiming power themselves. Probably also most people in this room will know that the leading lights within the suffragettes were the Pankhursts. But yes, certainly as they went through life, their politics diverged. So the suffragettes came out of a meeting of female members of the Independent Labour Party who were fed up because the Labour Party wasn't radical enough, and decided to break away and set up their own organisation, independent of political parties, calling for Votes for Women. But towards the end of the suffragette movement's lifetime, Emmeline and Christabel were kind of very clearly veering to the right. Indeed, by the time of the First World War, the very same Daily Mail who had so slagged it off in the early days, who had actually invented the term suffragette as a term of abuse. The proprietor of the Daily Mail by the time of the First World War was actually supporting the activities of Emmeline and Christabel because they were campaigning for the war. I mean,
can I just add that it wasn't limited to the suffragettes? You've got a similar problem within the socialist movement generally. That there was a newspaper called The Clarion, the editor of which was Robert Blatchford, and he actually came out in support of the war and split the clarion movement right down the middle. And there was even this, this almost sort of contradictory name for these people. They called themselves Empire Socialists, right? And they felt they had to support the war because the empire was at risk, that we would lose our empire if we didn't fight the Germans, right?
Yes. So Sylvia broke away. She wasn't just an anti-war activist, she was a socialist activist. Her organisation changed its name from the East London Federation of Suffragettes to the Women's Suffrage Federation to the Workers' Suffrage Federation, which is an interesting thing actually, because through that you can actually draw a direct line between the suffragettes and the Yes to AV campaign. Can I just do that quickly? Through kind of breakaway shifts. Let's go. Permission to just quickly go on a tangent? Okay, so suffragettes, Sylvia broke away from the suffragettes, set up the Women's Suffrage Foundation. Women's Suffrage Foundation became the Workers' Suffrage Foundation. Workers' Suffrage Foundation was one of the groups which kind of turned into the Communist Party of Great Britain. The Communist Party of Great Britain existed until the fall of the Berlin Wall in the kind of late 1980s. Then it split into several different bits, one of which was the New Politics Network. The New Politics Network became Unlocked Democracy. Unlocked Democracy became part of the Yes to AV campaign, therefore showing a direct link between the activities of the suffragettes and the Yes to AV campaign, although the suffragettes were a bit more successful. But anyway.
Actually, I'm not going to try and sort of steal Tim's thunder here, because he did a good job of that, but you could do the same thing with between Thomas Spence and Pigsmeat and the Chartist movement in the middle of the 19th century, and later on Henry George and his idea of a land tax. All of those go right back to Thomas Spence and his plan, which was basically what he wanted to do, and it's quite a radical plan, was to was for all of the people in one parish to claim the land for themselves, right? So so that they collectively own the land. He wanted to set up sort of, if you think of every parish as a Soviet, right? He wanted each parish to be autonomous in that sense.
Back to the suffragettes. Oh yeah, so there was another one called the Suffragettes eventually. That was set up by by Christabel Pankhurst. There was essentially a falling out between the Pethick Lawrences and the Pankhursts. So there's a critical biography of the suffragettes called The Pankhursts by Martin Pugh, in which he kind of reads lots and lots of diaries. And he heavily hints that this particular split was less because of politics and more because of who was sleeping with who. But he doesn't say that. So there we go. If you're familiar with that from aspects of politics that you're involved with, it's happened throughout history. Yes, you've had your hand for a long time.
Just a little thing. First thing is just that there's that hammer and sickle on the other. That page that you were showing.
Sylvia did go over to Russia and met with Lenin, and he eventually gave us some money. But he also wrote Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. I mean, this is a quote from Mark Steele, but Mark Steele in his lecture goes, "How cool is that? Sylvia Pankhurst was too left-wing for Lenin," which I think is a good line.